Welcome to the Stand Like Men podcast. I'm Logan Ingram.
And I'm Daniel Challenberg.
We're here to explore what it means to live out true masculinity. And this podcast is about us becoming the men that God wants us to be and encouraging y'all to join us along the way.
If you're enjoying the show, apparently it's very good for us if you like and subscribe and follow us on Facebook and Instagram and leave us a review on your podcast app. Apparently that helps get the word out for other people to also listen to our conversations.
So I've been at quite a few lunches with my wife where at the end of the lunch, she's kind of mad at me. And at the moment, I don't seem to know why exactly, or maybe we've gone out on a dinner date, awesome date, awesome food, whatever. We just didn't really talk. It just didn't go great. And what I determine and what she tells me later is I feel disconnected to you.
Okay.
I feel like we're disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that quite a bit. Sometimes I get offended. Sometimes I try to look inward and see what's going on. Sometimes I know exactly what's going on. Maybe it's stress at work or just something going on that I'm allowing to come between my time with her. And so we're just not on the same wavelength. Maybe communication's been off. We're just not able to connect. How do you deal with those situations? I'm sure you have them. I'm sure everybody listening to this has had those exact moments before, because it can be a million things.
A lot of it is, now it took us a long time to figure this out, but a lot of it goes down to communication. To address the situation that you mentioned, like a lot of it, we have to swallow our pride and say, hey, when you said this, I felt this. And then when you hear something like when my wife says, hey, when you said this, I did not like it at all. I need to respect that and not, now I may disagree with her, but I need to make sure that my disagreement is about the topic, not about, it's not targeted at her. I don't need to belittle her when I disagree with her, if that makes sense. In general, in order for the relationship to work, you have to communicate. And it took us a long time to figure that out. Like, my family does not talk about issues. Like, growing up, like, whenever we were mad at somebody else, no. Some of the members of my family would let them know very poignantly that they were mad at them. But in general, like, if we had an issue outside of the initial reaction, not going back to reaction versus responding, going after the initial reaction, like, we would just ignore it, like as if it never happened.
My wife would be loving this conversation because that's how our family does it.
Yeah.
Or my family.
Yeah. My wife's family is the exact opposite, where they will not stop talking about it until it's resolved.
Same.
And so when we first got married, like, we'd have a little argument or spat or whatever, and then I wanted to be done with it. And she's like, we need to talk about this. I'm like, what? Please don't make me do this. And so it was very, like, it was a big issue in our early years, because it's like, I didn't want to talk about it at all. I needed to process what had happened and I would be fine, where she needed to communicate in order to process it. And so we found a balance where when we had an argument, we would kind of split up and just clean the house, really. Where I would go and I'd start cleaning the kitchen, she would go and she'd clean the living room or the bathrooms or whatever. And then after a little bit, we'd come back together and have a conversation about what had happened and what had been discussed. And it was very uncomfortable for me to come back and have that conversation, because I'm like, I don't want to have a conversation. But she needed the conversation in order for us to be reconciled. She needed that conversation. So there was sacrifice on both ends, where she needed to wait and let me process, and then I needed to actually approach her and have a conversation. And so we found the compromise was that we would just go clean the house, and then that also took away some of the stressors. A dirty house can be a stressor in a relationship anyway. And so, like, we were productive in our fuming, for lack of a better word, where I would clean the kitchen. And then we joke that there were times in our relationship, there was a couple years in our relationship where the house was just spotless. to indicate that we were fighting all the time and we had to go and clean the house. And so, but like we always made it a point to come back and to become reconciled to each other and to discuss, okay, what just happened? We need to discuss the issue that caused the argument. And then we need to discuss anything that happened in the argument that hurt the other. That being said, whenever we had arguments or disagreements, it was never, we were never trying to win. We were trying to find the truth, or we're trying to find the right answer or the solution. Like when we disagreed about something, if she did something that hurt me or I did something that hurt her, it was never, you horrible, mean person, you jerk, I can't believe you did this to me, and then just start trying to hurt the other person. It was, we're trying to get back to fixing the relationship because there's a hurt here. We need to fix the hurt. We don't need to try to retaliate. How do you deal with disconnection?
Generally, it starts with a silent treatment and then a little bit of an argument.
Yeah.
Because my pride is getting in the way. You know, instead of just dealing with the disconnected part, why don't we go back to preparation, which is something we've talked about, and just being connected. So the stuff that we do to stay connected, and we've been married almost 19 years, 18 and a half years. And it's taken trial and error. It's taken a lot. And sometimes it still happens, of course. But I think we've been in maybe a 3 or 4 year stretch where we've been pretty good, like for the most part, like we're pretty solid. And one of them is we try to go to lunch once a week.
Oh, nice.
Some people that's just totally impossible because of work. We're blessed that we can do that. We've kind of, because the date night thing once a week is too hard. That one's tough for us, where some people can do that one, but not the lunch thing. So we try to make it a point to do that. And we don't, we both try to make it a point to communicate effectively, to ask the other how they're doing and how their heart is, how they're doing mentally, how they're doing, how are they still excited about work? What are we going to do about our kids doing something or another dumb that they've done? It's we got to be intentional. And we've talked about that many, many times, being intentional, but just spending time with one another, communicating. I've got a battle plan that I do for Order of Man, and it's like a 12-week plan on how to handle stuff. And there's daily tactics and stuff in there. And one of them is spend 10 to 15 minutes face to face with her every single day. And we generally nail that one. Cause it's dumb that, you have to say and write that down 10 to 15 minutes and make it a priority, but it's amazing how fast stuff gets in the way.
Oh yeah.
And how easy it is to end up going to bed and be like, man, I didn't even talk to you today. I haven't even seen you today. That just happens sometimes. We got kids, we got jobs. That just happens. And so being intentional about it's written down, it's online, it's everywhere. In my reminder that every day I need to do that. I need to take that time, say, how was your day? It's amazing how far that one thing goes. Just some face-to-face time where you look them in the eye. You're not looking at your phone. You're like, oh yeah, how's it going? Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, whatever. It's a real pointed, intentional time that you're spending with the other person. I can think of some of our distractions. Kids are a distraction.
Yeah, those darn kids.
Oh my gosh. At one point we had 2 different football teams, 2 different baseball teams, and tennis all going at the same time. And it was, they were just different nights a week. And we looked at our week and we were at a practice 5 nights a week. And then games are on Saturday for some of those. And it's like, this is insane. So kids, their school stuff, I don't know what the deal is with schools nowadays, but they want parents to be at every single function. Hey, it's Valentine's Day. You need to be at this school and watch your kid eat a pink cupcake. It's like a guilt trip they're giving these moms. And it's amazing how just those little rugrats can kind of get in the way in a sense of your relationship with your spouse. And then, and that's just one aspect. I mean, if you're both working, like my wife works full time, I've got a full time job, and I travel a lot
Mhm.
for work and other stuff. And it's just hard.
Mhm.
There's seasons that you'll go through also where maybe work is a little tougher. Kids stuff, like I said, the kids were 5 days a week. Well, right now we don't have anything. Football season's over for them. Baseball's not started, and so it's not as hard right
Mhm.
this second. But you make a plan for those times, because I know in the spring, well, I know one of them is going to be playing baseball and probably soccer, and
Mhm.
that's just him.
Mhm.
And then I don't know, the other one's probably going to play baseball too. And then I'll have a junior. I don't know what she's going to be. She's going to be in the play, I think.
Yeah.
And so, but we're thinking about that now.
Mhm.
We're responding to a situation that we know is going to happen instead of waiting for it to happen and then reacting and trying to catch up. I think that's the biggest problem with reacting is you're always playing catch up when you do that,
Mhm.
instead of preparing and being intentional about what's going to happen in the future, planning for the future. But your phone, man, if there was one distraction that would get the award for the greatest distraction that's ever been in the history of man, it'd probably be a cell phone.
Absolutely.
And they haven't even been around that long
Yeah.
in the history of
Mhm.
the world. But being intentional about that, setting down the phone, like what I was talking about with my wife, the 10 to 15 minutes, phone goes away.
Mhm.
Just set it down. And I know one thing that I'm really bad about and have been in the past, and I've actually worked on it and have gotten a lot better, is when we go to a restaurant. Most restaurants now have televisions. There's a game, there's a show,
Mhm.
HGTV's on. I don't know, somebody that tastes crayons for a living is buying a $5 million home.
Yeah.
I don't know. And
Oh,
so,
and they're always married to a butterfly breeder,
that's right. That's right.
and somehow they have like a $2 million budget,
Yeah.
and yet they still find a house that's over budget.
Yeah. But I'll get stuck watching it and realize, oh, crap, my wife is staring at me.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I'm not even looking at my wife or my kids for the last 5
Mhm.
minutes because I'm watching the television.
Yep.
And so sitting to where I can't see the television has become a little more intentional for me.
Mhm.
And some of it's just I'm so aware of it now that even if there is one, it's not as big a distraction.
Mhm.
But there's times where it is. It's just maybe work was a little hard and I want to disconnect, and oh man, there's a football game on. There's
Mhm.
something else on. Work is a big one. Like I travel a lot, work late sometimes. She's got stuff. She's got club stuff, university stuff, traveling stuff.
Mhm.
She's got plenty of stuff going on too. And it's easy to just get home and be tired and have a long day, go, just going to bed. Hey, love you. Good night.
Mhm.
And so being intentional about it, just setting aside a couple minutes, say, how was your day? Some nights it doesn't even have to be big, maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Mhm.
I feel like the eye to eye contact, both of you know you're listening.
Mhm.
And there's nothing around you to distract your eyes. Because I've noticed that big time with my wife. Eye contact is huge for
Mhm.
her. And I've heard that many times from other people. I don't know if it's the same for everyone, probably not, but
Yeah.
for her it is. And for me too, because I know she's listening to me also.
Mhm.
She's paying attention to what I'm saying, and I'm not distracted. She's not distracted.
So, if you don't know your love languages, folks, figure out your love languages, both your love language, how you receive love and how you give love, and then her love language, like how she receives love and how she gives love. And you need to find a way to. So this is relevant. I don't know how to transition into it, but like love languages is a real thing.
Well, why don't we just
And-
knock out some of them? Because a lot of
Okay.
people probably haven't read the book or heard of that before. I mean,
So
maybe they've just
there's-
heard it in passing.
There's 5 love languages, right?
Yep.
So there's physical touch, time spent, gift giving,
Words of affirmation.
and good deeds, something like that.
Yeah, acts of service.
Acts of service.
Yep.
And so you need to. Everybody has their own love language, whatever, and oftentimes it's like a mixture of the love languages. I'm really strong in I need physical touch to feel a connection. My wife is My wife is big on acts of service, and probably time spent are her two biggest
Or
ones.
quality time.
Quality time, yeah. And so, like, oftentimes, like, at night, like before bed, we'll just sit in bed and we'll just like what you were saying, we'll just talk. And like, of course, at that time I'm exhausted and I'm ready to go to sleep, but like I recognize that she needs the quality time and just conversation that we have. What else do you have to add about that?
Well, I think that's super important. It goes
Yeah.
back to the communication piece. You got to know what the other person needs.
Yeah.
Because now I know she needs that eye to eye. And she's told me, hey, I feel disconnected from you, because of whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And neither one of us like that. So you've got to be willing to be a little uncomfortable and hear uncomfortable things to be able to work through those issues and to be able to address. It's not even really an issue. It can become an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But just to be able to actually listen and hear, hey, I'm disconnected from you. I feel like you're distracted, without getting offended and without getting defensive.
Oh, for sure.
And so, but knowing your love language is super helpful because because it's not, and I think I said this the other day. There was an author who talked about the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It doesn't really work like that kind of.
It's not a one-to-one.
It's not a one-to-one because she doesn't want me to, like, I'm physical touch. She doesn't want me hanging all over all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not what she needs.
I get in trouble most often because I am hanging on her.
Yeah.
She's like, stop it.
And quality time is not as big for me, but that's her number one.
Yeah.
Words of affirmation to me, though, is like the world.
Yeah.
It's because words of affirmation is even secondary to physical touch for me.
Mm-hmm.
And acts of service is one of hers. She's a pretty good mixture.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't know that unless we really went through it. And
Mm-hmm.
she's like, hey, I really enjoy it when you do these things. And I know that you're thinking of me when I do these things.
Mm-hmm.
Or when you do these things.
It's about being intentional to find out what their love language is,
Mm-hmm.
and then be intentional about speaking to them.
And it's
In that language.
The word is literally language, love language, which goes with communicate.
Yeah.
So you've got to communicate.
Got to. I want to circle back about, you said that kids can be a distraction, and that goes back to, I don't know how to phrase it. It's just like the priority ladder or priority list of what is most important to you. The way it's supposed to be set is God is most important, and then your spouse, and then your children.
Yeah.
It has to be that way, because if your relationship with God is not right, your relationship with your wife is never going to be okay. And we can point to like the times that we were struggling the most with our relationship, my wife and I, is when one or both of us were struggling with our relationship with God.
Yeah.
Hands down, every single time that our faith was rocky or we were not being intentional with our spiritual life, our marriage was suffering. Your marriage has to be a priority over your children, because eventually, if everything goes as expected, your child is going to move out. After about 18 years, your child is going to be gone, and then you're stuck with whoever you're married to. If you have not been making that relationship a priority, then that person's a stranger. If both of you have been focusing all of your care and attention and love and affection on that child, that's wonderful. It's great. That child came out great. However, you no longer have that connection with your spouse. And probably your child has suffered because of that, because they don't know what a good, healthy relationship is. They don't know what a good, healthy marriage is, because they didn't see that, because you spent all of your time and energy focused on them rather than on each other. My wife and I do this where, like, we'll give each other a hug or whatever, and we'll say, she'll say, or no, we'll give each other a hug and we'll say, like, you're my favorite. And when my son was about 4 or 5 years old, he heard us say that. He's like, am I not your favorite? It's like, no. He goes, and he did not like to hear that. Oh, it hurt his feelings so bad. I'm like, here's why, buddy. And we had to explain, like, and he didn't get it because he was young, and he's starting to understand it now because he knows that just because he's not our favorite does not mean that we don't love him.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that like he doesn't have immense value with us. It just means that like we have to prioritize our relationship over him. Not neglecting him ever, but it just, in order for him to know what it means to be a good husband, he has to see what a good husband does and how a good husband acts.
Yeah.
And another thing about being intentional, you have to be intentional all the time. We don't do, we kind of started this because we didn't like going out on Valentine's Day because there's so many people. We don't like people. We like people, obviously, but like we don't like to be around them ever. And so, especially at a restaurant when it's super crowded, it's very noisy. It's stresses us out. It's hard to hear. It's hard to have a conversation. So growing up, early on in a relationship, we would go either the week before Valentine's Day or the week after Valentine's Day, and then it just kind of evolved into like Valentine's Day is not that important. It's kind of the same with our anniversary. Our anniversary is not that important because you cannot save your relationship on Valentine's Day and your anniversary. If you wait for those 2 days of the year to save your relationship, it will never last. It has to be a consistent, everyday, intentional. And it takes intentionality. I've forgotten all of the words that I've ever heard in my life. You have to be intentional every day of your life with your spouse in order for the relationship to work. You can't rely on a grand gesture on Valentine's Day and your anniversary in order for it to actually like work. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, how has your relationship been when you don't feel that you're living up to your role that God gave you? Like as a man in general, like not just a husband, but as a man in general, as a father in your business, whatever, in work, whatever, any aspect of your life where you know that I'm not being the man God wants me to be. How does your wife view that?
It's a good question. She normally lies to me and tells me that it's imposter syndrome, but of course I know that she's wrong and it is just my own inadequacies.
Yeah.
Which of course it's just imposter syndrome most of the time. I mean, there are times, and like she will be honest with me. Like there are times that I screw up, and she's like, and like we'll talk about it later that night, and she's like, "You really screwed up on that moment." I'm like, "Yes, I did." And like, we've decided that we have to be honest, brutally honest. Just last week, she had tried something new with her hair. She's like, "What do you think?" I'm like, "It's not that great." She goes, "Okay." And because I'm like, I'm really sorry, but like the way it's laying, it looks like an accident. It looks like it fell out. It looks like you didn't try. She goes, "No, I needed to know that because it wasn't about she wanted her hair to look good. It's that because I told her this doesn't look like your hair doesn't look good, she now trusts me when I say your hair looks good because she knows that I will tell her when something doesn't look right or something doesn't work well."
Yeah, here's a good question, kind of leading from that. All right. So when you tell your wife just what she wants to hear when you're having a conflict, how does that go over?
Not well.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
You give them exactly what they want. It's funny that they want something from us. I think that
truth and honesty.
Yes. Yeah, they want that. And they don't want us to be pushovers. And I think that's part of our God-given role is we're not supposed to just be pushovers. And it's funny, it kind of goes back to the garden, your desire will be for your husband. And I think that means to rule over him or to not be subservient. And so there's like this desire for our wives to I don't know. I think I'd be careful.
Yeah, though.
They don't act like it's almost like there's a power struggle between us sometimes when we have conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, they want us to step up and fulfill our God-given role. And if they're wrong, to let them know. Or if we're wrong, let them know. But to own it, own our role and our responsibility to come to a healthy conclusion on that conflict.
Yeah, like you said, to step up and to be the leader, but to not do it in a dominating fashion.
Yes. Because they know when we're not fulfilling our roles.
Yeah.
They don't actually want everything they want. Because I've seen men who just, they bow down and do everything their wives want them to do. Their wives don't respect them.
No.
And that's because they know they're being lied to, technically.
It shows a lack of respect to the wife.
Yes, it does. It does.
Because you're just placating them instead of like treating them like an adult.
Yeah. We have that discussion. I feel like you're just saying that because that's what I want to hear.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's because I'm actually sorry and I realize what I did.
Yeah. You have to be honest and you have to admit when you're wrong. I feel like that was an episode a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
Admit when you're wrong.
Yeah. Well, how do you deal with conflict then? And kind of going back to the spiritual leader stuff, is how are you strong and decisive with your wife and still humble and doing it out of love?
We actually had this conversation with with real good friends of ours. They were a little older than us. Like, how do you handle this? Like, you're the man and you're the spiritual leader of you're the leader of the family. You're the woman and you're supposed to submit to him. But how do y'all do that in a loving, caring, and respectful way where neither is viewed as a lesser person? And they said that they view it as a partnership, and they will have and we've tried to model our relationship about that, where I view her as a partner, not as a subordinate person. And so if we have a big decision or if we have an issue, we will talk about it. Eventually, if we cannot come to a conclusion, and it's happened on occasion where after several days or weeks of discussing this issue, we can't come to a conclusion. Finally, we get to a point where we're like, all right, Kara, she's like, all right, I'll submit and we'll do your way, which I respect her for that. But also that puts a whole lot of pressure on me because suddenly I've stood up and I've said, I will not do another option except for this one and I've got reasons for it. But ultimately, I've dug in my heels and I said, we have to do this route. And she submits. I need to be dang sure that that's the correct route. And if I'm not willing, if it gets to that point, it shows that I've not been willing to compromise. And if it's wrong, boy, is that bad. Because I've not only because I haven't respected her enough or her opinions or I've not valued her enough to actually listen to her and listen to her counsel.
Well, I think everyone can agree that marriage is really hard.
I disagree.
You disagree?
Yeah. Marriage is super easy.
Well,
here's why. Oh, were you going to, I'll let you finish.
Well, I will concede to that. And I think doing some of the things that help you to have a healthy marriage are hard.
Sure.
Being intentional is difficult sometimes. Fighting for your marriage is difficult sometimes. Having conversations with your wife about difficult subjects is difficult. But so is losing your marriage.
Yeah.
So is not spending time with your family. So is losing just the connection with your spouse. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't lose your marriage, losing that. And when the kids are out of the house, like you talked about earlier, you can't just focus on all the kids. Mm-hmm. And that's it. Because one day, hopefully, they'll be gone. And you wake up and realize you're not connected to your wife anymore. Mm-hmm. And I've watched people lose their marriages because it was difficult for them to do the things to keep it and to have a healthy marriage. And I just don't think that that's good enough. Everything's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to lose them. It's hard to keep them. Just pick the right one.
Yeah. So the reason I disagreed is the thing about marriage is you have to put your spouse's needs above your own desires. You just have to be selfless all the time. And that's so, like, in theory, it's extremely easy. It's the in practice, like you were talking about, like actually like being selfless is the hard part. Because I don't like to sacrifice my own desires. I like my desires. They make me feel comfortable. They make me feel happy. But like that's not actually beneficial. And that actually brings me to my next point. Marriage is not 50-50.
Nope. It's
Marriage
100, 100.
100, 100. Because if it's 50-50, then you're keeping score.
Yep.
And 1 Corinthians 13 says you can't do that. Love does not hold a grudge or keep score. My wife just got done with a lot of really bad health problems. She'd been struggling for about 10 years. She had a lot of complications from Emmett's birth and I'm trying to give the Reader's Digest version, had a surgery that turned out to be the wrong surgery, but we didn't know it at the time. And so for the next 10 years or so, she just gradually got worse. It got to where the worst she got was she couldn't process gluten and she couldn't process dairy. She just could not gain weight at all. And like, no matter what she ate or how much she ate, and she'd go talk to the doctor and she's like, I can't gain weight. And they're like, oh, congratulations. It's like, it's no, because it's not that she's like trying to lose weight. She's already malnourished. And you could see, like, looking back at pictures, like at the time we didn't realize it, but like looking back, like we call it her Skeletor phase. Cause like she looked emaciated. She looked so frail. And it's because like a lot of it goes back to that one surgery that like set her up to be in a bad health situation. We were in the dorm at the time. And so basically she'd wake up and she'd go do anything that she could in the dorm. And then she'd spend the rest of the time in bed because she couldn't like, her body could not absorb the nutrients from food. She was just in real bad shape. And so at that time, I had an option. I could either say, all right, well, I'm also working 40 hours. Like I'm working at my job and you need to help out around the house. But I took the 100-100. I didn't realize at the time, but I took the 100-100 approach and things needed to get done. And I'm going to give everything that I can right now because she's giving everything that she can. Yeah, so I was doing the cooking, I was doing the cleaning, I was making sure Emmett was taken care of, I was making sure she was taken care of, I was helping out with the dorm. Like I was doing as much as I could because she physically could not. And so, long story short, which I know is too late, she found another specialist and he's like, oh yeah, this is the problem and here's the solution. And he was right. And so now she's a lot better. She immediately can start processing gluten again. She can start eating dairy again, which is great because she never really stopped eating dairy. But yeah, like it was really weird because she's able to like cook dinner now. She's able to clean the house now. And like, it was the weirdest thing when I'd get home from work and I'd like, all right, what do you all want for dinner? She goes, it's ready already. I'm like, you already made dinner? She goes, yeah. And I'm like, and I cleaned the house and I did this. I'm like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to be doing right now because it had just become part of my life where things needed to get done and I just started working on them. Like I picked up the slack because she was unable to do it. I was giving 100% of myself. She was giving 100% of herself. It just meant that I had to cover more tasks at the time. When she started feeling healthier, she was still giving 100% of herself. It just meant that she was able to do more tasks. I don't know did any of that make sense?
Yeah,
okay.
I like that.
So it's 100-100 and you can't keep score. And like, because if you're keeping score, then you're belittling the other person and you're telling them that their only value is doing the things around the house.
And none of that is out of love.
No.
That's what it all goes back to.
Mm-hmm. I've got one more thing to throw out there.
Yeah.
This will be a little longer episode, but all right. So there's something that I learned about recently, and it was really inconvenient. They're calling it weaponized incompetence, which when I first heard it, I'm like, oh, that's stupid. But it's the attitude of, you're so much better at doing the dishes, I'm going to let you do the dishes.
Oh, I've heard this, yeah.
When in reality, like, you just don't want to do the dishes. And so you weaponize your incompetence, where you say, I'm just not good at this. I'm not good at mopping the floor. Well, have you ever actually tried to mop the floor? Have you ever tried to load the dishwasher? Like, you can still do things, even if you're not good at it. You can still do things. You've heard about weaponized incompetence?
Yes, I have. There's like memes and reels on Instagram and stuff where a guy's like, oh man, how do you work this thing? Like,
Yeah.
oh, and he's like vacuuming up the rug,
Yeah.
like getting stuff all caught in
Yeah.
it. And finally the wife comes over. She's like, never mind, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh man. And then just walks off and watches football or something.
No.
Yeah. He's like, feigns disappointment.
Darn
like,
it.
darn, I can't believe
Or
I
like
couldn't figure that out.
Or intentionally doing it wrong so that you don't have to do it again.
That's exactly right.
And I used to think that was funny, but then I started realizing it just puts a burden on them.
Mhm.
And it shows a complete lack of respect for them.
Yeah.
When you're unwilling to do something. Like, if you say, you're just so much better at cleaning the bathrooms than I am, whether that's true or not, like, if you're unwilling to clean the bathrooms, then you're telling her that cleaning the bathrooms is beneath you. And
Yeah.
you're not willing to do it. And
that's
has
her
to do it.
job.
It's her job. Yeah, it's harmful.
Mhm.
And we can't be doing it. Now, that being said, my wife and I have kind of come to, I don't know if it's an agreement or what, but like, where she naturally does go clean the bathroom. And she's like, I don't mind cleaning the bathroom. I don't know if she enjoys it or not, but she's like, I don't mind cleaning the bathroom. I don't necessarily enjoy cleaning the bathroom, but she doesn't like doing the dishes or cleaning the kitchen. And so like, we naturally have split into these roles where she will usually clean the kitchen, or she will usually clean the bathrooms. I will usually clean the kitchen, but that doesn't mean that when it needs to be done, I can still go clean the bathrooms.
Well, going back to, marriage is not a 50-50. Think about what you're talking about, like the chores around the house.
Mm-hmm.
Say something happens to her again, health-wise, and she can't do it. If you're just doing 50-50, well, half the house is getting done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't just leave the rest of it. I mean, there's at no point is that okay.
Yeah.
Like, you've got to pick up the pace and you've got to keep it going. And the same as if something happens to you, she's not going to just be like, well, that was his job, I'm just not doing it.
It's a partnership.
Yeah. So what are some things that we could leave with our listeners, the things that we know that have worked for us in our marriage, keep our marriage strong?
First thing is communication. You have to communicate, because if you're not communicating, then you're suffering. Like, the marriage, the relationship is suffering if you're not communicating. And a lot of that, you have to start with communicating. How do you communicate best? You have to circle back and say, okay, how do I need to bring this up? How do I need to talk about this? That's my number one thing, that the practical application of this. What do you think yours is?
Yeah, pray together, or at least pray for your spouse, even if you don't pray together.
Mm-hmm.
But just being intentional about stuff, being intentional about your communication, be intentional about prayer, be intentional about the time you're spending with them to keep that connection alive.
Thanks again for listening to Stand Like Men podcast. We'd love it if you would like and subscribe, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to send us an email, you can reach us at standlikemen@gmail.com.
Our verse is 1 Corinthians 16, 13, and 14.
Be watchful.
Stand firm in the faith. Act like men. Be strong.
Let all that you do be done in love.